There's an old saying in laboratories, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And so one of the most important aspects of the technician's job is keeping an accurate technician laboratory notebook. The notebook is actually part of a much larger system of laboratory documentation that can include a variety of different records, both electronic and in print. On the one hand, the laboratory notebook is some part of our day-to-day observations for planning and for development. We want continuity between different experiments that we might be doing, and we need to be able to always backtrack in case we have unexpected results. So we need to be, perhaps we might not get the result that we expected, and we want to be able to look back through our notes and find out what might have gone wrong. Of course, we also want a very good record of anything that went right. Types of documentation. There's kind of a lot of misinformation out now about the role of laboratory notebooks. Most people tend to think of it as some kind of a diary, and at one point it really was more of a diary than it really is today. At one time, laboratories were much less complicated. They were very ad hoc or single purposes. And so you had one researcher, maybe one or two technicians, and they were laboring over a long period of time. And so everything just kind of went into one laboratory notebook. And it was a record of the day-to-day activities in the laboratory. Most laboratories nowadays are much more complicated. You can have multiple projects going on at the same time. You can have multiple researchers. Many larger laboratories will have postdocs coming in and out. They may be training technicians. They may have interns running around the lab. And so we see the laboratory notebook taking on a little bit different function. Increasingly, we're also seeing the Laboratory Information Management System, or LIMS, L-I-M-S, taking over a lot of our record keeping. For instance, you may be keeping an electronic diary of your day-to-day operations. One other aspect, of course, is that the laboratories are increasingly digital, and so we have, in some cases, very large files. We may have photographic evidence of a particular experiment, or video evidence of a particular experiment, in which the file is 50 to 100 megabytes. A simple black and white Polaroid picture glued into a laboratory notebook is no longer going to suffice. For one thing, there's no Polaroid pictures anymore either. So these large digital files have to be stored someplace, and it has to be referenced into a laboratory notebook, but not necessarily stored there. More and more we're seeing that CDs and DVDs are the storage mechanism for large amounts of data. Of course, magnetic media can be erased, and so we wouldn't want that. And the same, we really don't use erasable and rewritable CDs and DVDs, but write once, burn once DVDs and CDs are acceptable methods if they're properly referenced in the laboratory. Now, some examples of different laboratory documentation that you might see. Now, one of the most common is the SOP notebook. This is an example of a loose leaf bounder that has standard operating procedures in it. And as you can see, it is loose leaf bound. Each one of the sheets here, it's designed to be a particular experiment. And so this would be kind of commonly used if you're working on formulations. Now, an SOP has down at the bottom on these particular SOPs has the date on them. It has the revision history. And so these would be referenced in a laboratory notebook. In other words, we write down which SOP we did on a particular day, and each one of these are numbered sequentially so that we know which one we could go back to. And we would keep a record, a separate record then, usually in the SOP notebook itself, of the actual history of the development of those particular methods. Another example has to do with lab diaries and lab ledgers. We see these less common going forward. The traditional bound laboratory diary is quickly giving way to electronic records. You're much more likely to see a lab diary stored these days in a write-protected document file. Another thing you're seeing that used to be very common but is becoming much less so are ledgers. This is an example of a receipt ledger from a period of just not too long ago, a few years ago, and it records the date, what was received, any reference numbers, and any usages, and of course the initials of the person receiving it. And this becomes then a record of the lot numbers and the different chemicals that were received by a particular laboratory. Now these are disappearing and becoming more electronic as well. In fact, many of the large companies that supply chemicals and other kinds of reagents increasingly are allowing you to store those information online in your account number, and so you can go on and reorder a particular chemical and you can see a history of lot numbers there online. And of course LIMS systems have ways of maintaining that. Another example of a particular type of book that you might find in a laboratory is the inventor's notebook. Now, in our laboratory here, the inventor's notebooks are always black and our laboratory notebooks are always blue, so we can distinguish those. As you can see, it has ruled lines, and you would enter any information in here, concepts for new patents, because this is only related to patents. So you would use this specifically if you're going to have a concept that you think might result in a patent. Now, the day-to-day documentation and the experiments that you're going to use for that patent would certainly be in the laboratory notebook and not in this particular record. So these are concepts. This is where you're planning on going over the next couple of years. Here's a typical research notebook that a technician would maintain, and let's take a quick look at this. You'll notice, first instance, that it's hardbound. Okay, on the inside page there is a set of references here. Who does this notebook belong to? There's some guidelines here for maintaining the notebook. There's a set of table of contents pages which need to be filled out and maintained. Sometimes we don't fill those out until the book is full, and we go through then and indicate in the table of contents the most important pages. As you can see, it's ruled, and there's numbers over here for references. So we'll talk a little bit more about how to fill out these pages and what kind of information goes in here. There's a place on the bottom for witnesses, either the laboratory management or the person taking the notes. The paper in a laboratory notebook is a specific kind of called an archival paper. Archival paper is designed to last hundreds of years. Okay, if this is kept someplace where, away from being wet and away from moisture, you can expect this to last for a very long time. Likewise, the binding is sewed, and it's done in such a way that it will lie flat. Now that may not sound like a very important thing to you on this video, but if you're trying to write in a book or if you're trying to read from your notes, I guarantee you having something that wants to lie flat, perfectly flat, becomes an important convenience.